is Professor of Law at Glasgow University, Professor Adam Tomkins. Please welcome.
In legal terms, what would happen in the unfortunate event of a yes vote next week is that Scotland would become a new state in international law, and the rest of the United Kingdom would continue as what lawyers call a continuator state. Lawyers are very good at making up words. The UK would not be extinguished if Scotland voted to leave, just as the UK was not extinguished in 1922 when the Irish Free State came into being. Along with England, Wales and Northern Ireland, Scotland is a member of the family of nations, which we call the United Kingdom. If Scotland walks out on that family, that is, if we vote yes to becoming a new independent state, the rest of the family will carry on without us. Now, the legal consequence of this is important. The legal consequence of this is that the public institutions of the United Kingdom would automatically become the public institutions of the rest of the United Kingdom. So the UK Parliament would become the Parliament of the rest of the United Kingdom. The UK Supreme Court would become the Supreme Court of the rest of the United Kingdom. And the same goes for the UK's defence and security and secret intelligence services. The Bank of England is a UK institution, and so is the BBC. And at the moment, these institutions exist to serve the public in all four of the UK's home nations. But if we vote to become independent, we vote to leave the UK. And if we leave the UK, we leave the protection, the advantages and the benefits of the UK's public institutions, including the Bank of England and the BBC. Scotland would be entitled to no share in these institutions. What an independent Scotland would be entitled to is a fair share of the UK's assets and indeed of the UK's liabilities. When states break up, or when a territory within a state secedes to become a new state, the assets and liabilities of the state fall to be apportioned equitably between, in this instance, Scotland and the rest of the UK. Now, the apportionment of the UK's assets and liabilities would constitute a large part of the separation negotiations that would have to follow any yes vote next week. And while the details of those negotiations would be a matter of politics, the law does provide a number of principles that would shape the negotiations. And among these legal principles are the following. The UK's fixed property in Scotland, so government buildings, for example, would become the property of the new Scottish state. And conversely, Scotland would have no claim on the UK's fixed property in the rest of the UK or overseas. The UK's movable property in Scotland would become the property of the new Scottish state, where it could be shown to have been specifically for local use. So, for example, an ambulance that's associated with the Southern General in Scotland is currently movable property, unless the ambulance is broken. It's movable property that belongs to the UK state. But it would become the property of the new Scottish state because it could be shown to be specifically for local use in Glasgow, which is in Scotland. Now, historical contribution is of no relevance. UK fixed property in Scotland would become the property of the new Scottish state, even if its construction had been paid for by UK taxpayers as a whole, and no compensation would be due to the rest of the UK. That's enough law. Now what I want to try and do is explain why all of that matters, and why all of it matters to you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that none of this will ever matter, because it won't matter if, as I hope we will, we vote no next week to the Nationalists' offer. But the polls, as you may have noticed, have closed a wee bit. Every vote counts. There are no safe constituencies in next week's referendum. And if this does go wrong, if the Scots do vote to quit the UK and to start afresh as a new state, the legal details that I've just outlined will matter very much indeed. Your future prosperity, your future security will depend upon them. Which is why, as a lawyer, I am appalled that the nationalists have been so reckless, so cavalier, so downright dishonest about them. So let me give you some examples. And I'm going to start with the pound, which Ronnie has already talked about. On the pound, the Scottish Government's famous independence white paper, remember that? States, and I quote, that the pound is Scotland's currency just as much as it is the rest of the UK's, unquote. Wholly wrong in law. The pound is Scotland's currency now, precisely because, and only because, Scotland is part of the UK now. And if we vote to leave the UK, we will be voting to leave the UK's institutions, including the UK pound. Now, Scotland could then seek to negotiate its way back into these institutions, but the rest of the UK would agree to this only if it was in their interests to do so. And as we know, Chancellor of the Exchequer George Osborne, Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls, and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, the Right Honourable Danny Alexander, have all ruled this out as being contrary not only to the economic interests of the rest of the UK, but also to their political interests. Now, this does not mean, as a matter of law, that Scotland would be unable to use the pound. Any state can use a currency such as the pound, which is freely tradable, in the way that Panama uses the US dollar. But as Ronnie was explaining, for a state to make this choice means that that state has no control whatsoever over its monetary policy or its interest rates. Rather, these matters are effectively surrendered to a foreign power. And Ronnie has explained carefully and in scary detail why this would be economic catastrophe for Scotland. What I have to tell you is that the SNP's position on the currency is not only economic madness, it's also legal nonsense. The SNP say that if they cannot have a currency union, they will refuse their share of the UK's national debt. This is legal illiteracy of the first order. This professor fails it. If an independent Scotland were to refuse its share of the UK's debt, the rest of the UK would be perfectly within its rights to withhold from Scotland her share of the UK's assets. Liabilities run with assets. And the Bank of England, ladies and gentlemen, is not an asset. It's a public institution. The currency reserves buried deep in the Bank of England's vaults, if there are any left, they are assets. But the First Minister's demands are not merely to his fair share of those, but to joint control of the bank itself. And as others have said, this is a plan which is devoid of precedent and entirely fanciful. Neither is the pound an asset. It's a means of exchange. It isn't Scotland's pound. It isn't England's either. When the First Minister declaims from his perch in the Scottish Parliament that it's our pound and we're keeping it, he's talking legal nonsense. It's not Scotland's pound, and it's not England's either. It's the UK pound. And if you vote to leave the UK, you vote to leave the UK's public institutions, including the UK pound. But it's not just in relation to the pound where the SNP have failed to understand the law governing their pet project of state separation. Let me give you one or two other examples. On the UK's embassies, the Independence White Paper states that Scotland would be entitled to a fair share of the UK's extensive overseas property, allowing us to use existing premises for some overseas posts, unquote. Again, wholly erroneous in law, entirely without legal foundation, a baseless claim. International law provides that state property would remain the property of the continuator state, the rest of the UK, unless it was located in the territory of the new state. And so far as I'm aware, none of the UK's consulates or embassies are located in the UK. Now, the UK government understood this and correctly stated that an independent Scottish state would not be entitled by right to any UK diplomatic premises, equipment or staff. The legal position, ladies and gentlemen, is clear, but not clear enough for the SNP to have grasped it. The bodies that support the UK now would operate on behalf of the remainder of the UK if we vote to leave the UK. The UK has a vast diplomatic network to keep us safe when we travel abroad. 14,000 staff in 267 embassies and consulates in 154 territories and countries all around the world. The SNP are wholly wrong to imagine that an independent Scotland would have any claim on this. An independent Scotland would have to start from scratch to build its own diplomatic network, with what resources never been made clear. The SNP would have you believe that voting yes is a risk-free option. Overnight, you could lose all the things you don't like about the British state without losing any of the things that you do like. But it's a fundamentally dishonest position. A yes vote is not remotely risk-free. A yes vote would cost Scottish jobs. Just look at what the banks and the financial services sector have been saying this week. A yes vote would cost Scottish trade. Scotland trades more with the rest of the UK, more than twice as much with the UK, as it does with the whole of the rest of the world put together. A yes vote would cost Scottish households. Supermarket goods would be more expensive. Family budgets even more squeezed than they are already. And a yes vote would cost the Scottish taxpayer dear. Walk away from the Bank of England, we'd need a new central bank of our own. Walk away from the UK, we'd need new defence and security services of our own. Leave Britain, and we'd need a new diplomatic corps of our own. We'd have to find the people, we'd have to train them, we'd have to pay them, and we'd have to buy the buildings to put them in. Less than a week away from the referendum, and the SNP has still not explained to the Scottish people how much this would cost or where the money is coming from. We're being sold a false prospectus, ladies and gentlemen. The SNP's plans for Scotland are economically ruinous, but they are also based on a fundamental misconception of what independence would mean as a matter of law. Don't let them pull the wool over your eyes. Send them away to think again and vote no!